This is the second school that we visited this morning. We are with the Premier of the Northwest Province, Professor Job Mokgoro, as well as the MEC, Mema Timel, and the Minister of Basic Education is here. We also want to take this opportunity to recognize the representatives from Anglo-American Platinum, as well as Impala Platinum Mine, the CEO, Mr. Mark Monroe. Thank you for being here this morning. We are not going to waste time. I'm going to ask the Minister of Basic Education to come through to address the media. But I need to also say that we have the CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust, Mr. Godwin Khosa, with us. And we also have the CEO of Rand Water. We are going to be connecting with him online. There's a presentation that he's got. Mr. Khosa as well has a presentation. But I also need to say that the Director General of the Department of Basic Education is here, Mr. Matanzi Mamuel. He also has a presentation that is going to make. But all of that will come after the Minister has taken to the stage to address us. Minister, I'm going to hand over to you, and please ascend to the stage. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Elijah. Let me acknowledge the Premier, Tate Mokgoro, my colleague, the MEC of Education in Northwest, the leadership of Platinum Mine that gave us a beautiful school. Thank you very much, CEO. Also acknowledge our DG, Tate Mueli, and the school leadership, the principal and the staff who have really kept this school in a very good state. I had the privilege to receive the school in my previous term, and it's as I left it. So, congratulations to principal. From the outset, I really have to acknowledge the furor that of yesterday's media conference, and for that I sincerely apologize. Due to last-minute changes, and I think the media will be aware that on Saturday we had the CEM, and after the CEM we met with our unions, your governing bodies, but also received a report, and almost the whole day on Saturday. And the decision that we took on Saturday forced me to use Sunday to do a series of consultations, because on Saturday I take not to receive learners today. But it had major implications for the sector because it was very late by the time that decision was taken. Learners which were on the way to schools, especially from outside provinces, principals were not aware of the decision that we took on Saturday. So I spent almost the whole of Sunday consulting. So as I said, I was forced into a number of consultations with a number of key stakeholders who have a direct interest in basic education, and resulting in challenges for me to continue with the press briefing we had planned. Because I didn't want principals to first hear from the media that they can't receive learners before we speak to them directly. So I had to engage with Association of School Principals. I had to engage with leadership of schools, both private and independent, because they were also using the date and they are not part of the public system, and they had to be told already by Sunday that there was a decision that we had taken on Saturday. I also had to communicate to get into a meeting for South African Human Rights Commission, because itself also was threatening interdiction, so I had to also spend time with them. I also had to spend time with organizations representing learners with special needs. And I really want to repeat that. I really wish to apologize wholeheartedly for the inconvenience that was caused yesterday. But it was beyond my control, because I had to make sure that all key stakeholders are informed in time so that they can mitigate all the challenges which have been brought by the decision that we took very late on Saturday. So if you recall, on the 19th of May 2020, I announced a phased opening of schools from June. Following that announcement, our department convened a number of meetings, weekly basis, and sometimes more than twice a week. I had engaged with heads of provincial education departments to prepare the system for the new environment. I had to engage with teacher unions about the new environment we have to operate under, with your national school governing bodies, with your principals associations, with the different NGOs working in the sector, but also organizations working with learners with special needs. We had to engage with assessment bodies to make sure that indeed with the new there will be necessary changes to our assessment system, and a series of stakeholders with a direct interest in basic education. So we had to consult with everybody else who works with us. As I said, some of these meetings were convened on a weekly basis and some more than once a week. And the main focus of these meetings was to collaborate with our key stakeholders and to put in place measures to ensure the readiness of the system for the phase-in reopening of schools. As indicated earlier, critical to the reopening of schools was and still remains absolute compliance with all health safety requirements pronounced by the Department of Health. So on the 30th of May, which is this past Saturday, we again met as Council of Education Ministers to have our final report, because we've been receiving these weekly reports. And we received 3 critical reports. The first of the State of Readiness report, which we received from the NECT, and I did invite them today to really give you a sense of what were the tools they were using and what were the recommendations that they made after giving us that final report. We also received a report from Rand Water, and I've also invited them to really also come and assure the nation from their reports that we are indeed on the right track, so that our extension of the schools opening, because it's informed by the finalization of the work that they're doing for us, will also be here, so they're here to also speak for themselves. But we also, as a sector, because we also work with provinces or a concurrent structure, I had to meet with my colleagues from provinces and receive reports from different provinces in terms of their state of readiness and their state of unreadiness. So those were the 3 reports that informed our decision late on Saturday. So based on these reports, it became clear that the sector was at different levels of readiness. And as you recall, that we were allowed to open schools only if we meet the health requirements to the. So those reports confirmed in some instances were 80%, in other provinces were 96%, but we were not all at the same level. And in the main, it was this reason that the CM determined that the sector requires more time to mop up its state of readiness for schools reopening. And as I will speak to that about what were outstanding matters. But I can speak to some of them off the cuff because on Thursday I visited a number of schools. In Gauteng on Friday I went to the Free State. I went to the first school in Olivenhout and the principal was and they were doing everything to ready themselves for Monday. Paul whispered to me and said, you know, Minister, we are here all the time. We leave this school very late, but let me tell you, I will not be ready to teach on Monday. Because the things we had to do are things that ourselves had not anticipated that we'll have to do. Because the most difficult part was reorganizing the curriculum, getting teachers who were not teaching grade 12s too, and just those decisions around the curriculum took the schools a long, long time to come to conclusion. But in terms of your protective clothing, on Thursday they were only delivering the PP, the protective equipment by the province for learners. So which means learners will not have been informed already by Friday. So it's a fact. So I think it answers other questions that I anticipate you will ask. That it's a fact that I can confirm that by the time I went to certain schools, there were schools that were not ready. From Olivenhout Bosch, I went to Midrand Secondary. Again, the principal, the vice principals were having tape measures. Because one thing that we had not thought through properly, DG, we had a schedule on the arrival of teachers and didn't make a schedule on the arrival of other support staff. And you would have expected principals themselves running schools would have closed the gap. So when I went to Ivory Park, it was the principal and the vice principal who was busy doing measuring of distances, whereas they had spent the whole week dealing with curriculum issues. Whereas if we had really planned, the support staff was supposed to have arrived with the principal and all the other administrative work. Even the principal of Ivory Park said to me, Minister, by Monday I'll receive kids, which means I'm going to be inducting learners and teachers at the same time. We are sure we'll be finished by Sunday, but we have not met all the requirements and the steps that we had put for us. I proceeded to go to Kempton Park, and they were beyond what we had asked. They had inducted parents, not only teachers, they had inducted parents, they had orientated their learners, they were ready to move. Everything was in place. But even there, the principal said to me, when my teachers came here, the anxiety in their faces tells me that on Monday we will not be able to teach these learners. We have to really calm them down because it took me time to settle teachers. So I'm just giving an example of our experience to say there were schools which were very ready. There were schools that were not ready. Friday, Free State, they were beyond ready. When I went to school which I went to, I found them already inducted in their learners. Because they themselves also are saying when the teachers arrived, they were very anxious and they felt that if they were to teach on Monday, they must induct their learners. They had called parents, showed them all the health protocols to reassure them about the safety. Because as you remember, we all said, everybody is anxious and it's very important for people reassuring each other. So as a result of those reports, as I say, we took a decision to say, let's use this week to mop up. But it's a decision we took very late on Saturday when we had our final report. And there were different views to say, why don't we let the schools that are ready to proceed, because it will kill the momentum if we say they must not proceed, and focus on the schools that were not ready, because some will be ready at different times. I'm giving an example of Ivory Park. The principal said, at least by Tuesday, I'll be ready to teach. The principal of Olivenhout said, I'll be ready by Wednesday. So which means we're all unready. But the decision was that there were other key factors around safety for the coronavirus which have not been satisfied, like water. Therefore, it will be risky to have a blanket opening of schools. And it took us long on Saturday to arrive at that. So on Sunday, I had to spend the whole day speaking to private schools because they also needed reassurance. We had to agree. I had to speak to. So it was a series of people that we had to consult with. And I'm still explaining why I had to call the media off, because I just could not jump other steps, especially with people who were affected, because principals needed to know. By yesterday, what do they do? Do they phone parents? Do they send messages to say parents must not bring children? And that's what took long. So I want to say again, I'm very, very sorry. But based on these reports, it became quite clear that the sector was at different levels of readiness. In the main, it was for this reason that CEM, your Council of Education Ministers, determined that the sector requires just more time to mop out the state of readiness for school reopening in order to comply with the health and safety standards of COVID-19. So the Saturday CM resolved that teachers whose schools have already received the personal protective equipment will be expected to report at work on the 1st of June. So we're expecting teachers to come today, and I'm glad the first school I went to, they have a full complement of teachers. They had 25 teachers in their books. They had 25 teachers. But even then, it was qualified that if they have received, because the report was saying as late as Saturday, there are schools which had not received their protective equipment from their provinces. And when they arrive, those teachers have to prioritize the preparation of their work to deal with the new normal brought about by the coronavirus. And that new normal meant different and new tasks for teachers, because even here the principal was telling me that she had 5 classes. You said 2 classes for matric. We have 5. Now you are at 8. So which means teachers were not teaching grade 12, now have to teach grade 12, and therefore you have to work out in terms of your staffing deployment, how do you deploy your teachers? And that was not an easy one, because I think as schools we have this tendency of saying your most experienced or most skills go to grade 12, the others. So we've had to reorganize ourselves. So as provinces, we also agree that we must finalize all outstanding deliveries of your PPEs to schools and the outstanding provision of water and sanitation. Because by Sunday when we met, Randwater gave us a report. They had not finished. I think they'll speak for themselves. There were schools that they had not delivered tankers to. They're only arriving today. And teachers and support staff should be inducted and orientated for the new environment brought by COVID-19. Because it's the very same teachers who have to be armed with all the necessary information, who in return have to support and induct learners. So some of them obviously would not have been inducted by Friday or Saturday. Therefore, we've agreed that schools which have not inducted people, they should do the induction. And again, as I say, when I was in the Free State, it was a health department, there was a doctor and nurses which were teaching our staff about the virus and all sorts of things and working out the protocols of linkages between themselves. And we also agreed that provinces should finalize the training of screeners. Because again, screeners were appointed, they had not arrived at schools, but other provinces had done it. I'm told the MEC tells me that she had trained all her screeners, she had trained all her school nutrition members, and also volunteers that had come to assist us. Because what is going to happen in the first weeks, especially in the primary schools, we have to help force our children to understand the new environment. There are going to be different assembly points. They're not going to be able to interact with their friends. They are going to have different breaks. They are going to leave the school at different times. So it's a new environment because they must not be crowded at the same place. So all those logistics have to be sorted out so that come next week, everybody knows where the assembly point is. You see, MC, when I went to the Free State, there were even color coding classes. to say the yellow only assemble there. They don't go anywhere else. The green only assemble there. The yellow, so that even inside the school, they are not able to interact, and the whole area has been color-coded in terms of the directions. But we also had to deal with processes related to independent schools, right? So they had made their own submissions to say, we're small. Some of them are small. So the reason for us to phase in is to allow us opportunity to start. It's not because we don't want all the learners here. It's to allow us to really create a COVID-19 compliant environment. And they say, we have, come and inspect us, we have. So we had to deal with those. We also had to deal with schools of learners with special needs. Because even those are different, they're therapeutic, they're a different space that we had to work through. So we did discuss, then we met after our decision with MECs, then we met with teacher unions and the National School Body Associations to share with them our decisions, to use this week to mop up and ensure that all the outstanding matters are attended to, and agreed with them that this week was going to be a mopping period. Schools that have completed all the necessary steps should use this week for induction and orientation. So let me not repeat that. So what is happening now is that provinces are now putting their shoulder to the wheel to ensure that all prerequisites not yet fulfilled will be delivered within the week 1 of June. And together with our partners, agreed to another meeting on Thursday to continue to monitor and evaluate all outstanding compliance imperatives. For instance, we also had situations where, because we announced late our decision on Sunday, parents had started driving their kids to schools. I mean, parents phoned me to say, I'm in the Eastern Cape, my child is in a boarding school, are you saying I must come back? So we had to deal with all the matters that really were a fallout because of the late decision. So we communicated, unfortunately quite late, that parents should not bring grade 7 and learners 7 and 12 to schools, but teachers who have received their PPEs are expected to report for work and carry out their responsibilities as spelled out. And more importantly, the sector agreed that the effective teaching and learning should resume on the 8th of June 2020. I've decided to also to take the nation to confidence with regards to the situation that we have faced. And that's why I've requested that the CEO of NECT should come to say what is contained in the report that gave us the recommendations to take just another week for postponement. And I think I don't want to speak, to spend lots of time on, because they will speak for themselves. And as I said earlier, I've also invited the Water Board to also assure the nation, because that's one of the key deal breakers, to say, indeed, on Thursday, when we meet, will the water tanks which are outstanding be in all the schools that are there? So, as I said, also based on the reports that I received from provinces, I'm very hopeful that all outstanding challenges they unearth will be addressed during this period so that we can be able to start teaching. But as I said, in my province, things will only arrive in Friday, Saturday, so which means they've arrived. Then they can use this week to induct. Because my view is that any further delays, it's not only my view, and also with my colleagues in provinces, poses a very serious threat to the system and the future of learners that are yearning for. Because it is poor learners who are going to be highly disadvantaged if we keep on postponing. They have not had the benefits, and I'm proud the principal she says when she opens next week, she'll be on term 3, because she was able to continue interacting with her learners during the lockdown. But other learners have not had that privilege, so which means they still have to do term 2 work during term 3. and they're expected to write the same exam with learners whose teaching was not interrupted during the lockdown. But the other matter, because as I said, colleagues will speak to the other matters, I thought I should also go through, Chair, the directives that we issued on Saturday. So on May the 29th, which is on Friday, as DBE, we issued a government gazette with directives regarding the reopening of schools and measures that address, prevent, and combat the spread of coronavirus in the basic education sector. And these directives were issued in terms of Regulation 4.3 of the regulations which were developed under the Disaster Management Act of 2002 and was published on 29 April 2020. And the main purpose of these directives is to provide the arrangements for a phased return of educators, officials, learners, and support staff to schools and offices. Number one, in those directives, that in terms of the movement of people between provinces, because we have teachers coming from Eastern Cape teaching in Northern Cape, or teachers from Eastern Cape teaching in Western Cape. So in terms of the movement of people between provinces, metropolitan areas and districts, there will be a permit issued for officials and educators under alert level 3, which means from today, who have to commute to and from work on a daily basis. And these permits will be issued by the heads of department or a delegated official. There will be a certificate issued to learners who have to commute to and from on a daily basis, which will be issued by a principal of a school. For instance, in your area like Parys, where kids study in the Val, again, there must be a permit which is issued, and the issuing of the certificate must be done in compliance with the regulations. And even a person transporting a learner to school must also be issued with a permit. So again, the drivers themselves who drive kids up and down to school, they must have a permit. The regulations are also saying all extramural events at schools, including sport, choral estate fort, or choral rehearsals, arts and other cultural festivals, remain suspended. And we will talk about, or the minister will determine, in conjunction with provinces, if there is a need to lift some of these limitations. So a parent, for instance, there's been questions about parents who still feel anxious about sending their kids to school because they're not very sure about their safety. The directives are saying a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school must apply to the head of the Provincial Education Department, who in the terms of the South African School Act can exempt a learner entirely, partially, or conditionally from compulsory attendance. And if such an exemption is in the best interest of the learner. And a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school is obliged to apply for home education. So if your child doesn't have your underlying comorbidities, will fall under the second category, because the head of department or the principal has to give an approval. So you can't keep your child at home to say, I'm anxious. And therefore, we find ourselves having to support you. No. If it's reasons that the principal has not accepted, especially mainly around health issues. So a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school is obliged, because basic education is compulsory. So education of children between 6 and 15 is compulsory by law. So is obliged to apply for home education in terms of the relevant section of the South African School Act. So they must go and familiarize themselves with the conditions of homeschooling and comply, because even then you have to apply. You just can't keep your child home. You have to apply and meet all the conditions that are required under homeschooling. So we have been receiving many inquiries regarding the matric examinations, and it is clear that a lot of anxiety there's lots of anxiety on the matter, and we had to gazette it as well, since it is also an extremely sensitive matter in the basic education system. So we've given directives formally that the May-June 20 examination for candidates who registered for the senior certificate and national certificate is going to be administered in December. So those are your adult learners or your part-time learners. So we had to agree with Umalus, which is our examining body, that we will only assess those learners in December. Unless unforeseen circumstances occur, in which instance I, as the minister, will take the necessary determination. If anything happens, the country says we can't go to work for some reason, we will then have to take a new decision. But for now, the decisions that the learners were supposed to write in June will write in December. As indicated in all previous media briefings, the health and safety of learners, teachers, and all employees within schooling are our major concern. And it is for these reasons that we must ensure that all schools comply with the minimum health and safety requirement and measures determined by health for a school to be able to reopen. And again, there were concerns which were raised by the Human Rights Commission on this matter, MEC, to say, are we saying if schools don't comply, those children will have to suffer and their school is not functioning? The right to education is an inalienable right for all learners. So which means ourselves as a sector will have to find alternatives for those kids to be able to access their rights without being prejudiced by the fact that we are not able to provide conducive conditions. So I thought I should clarify that, because it has been coming repeatedly, that if we really find it impossible, by the time we say there must be learning and teaching, as a sector we have an obligation to find an alternative for those learners so that their rights to education is not compromised. Again, any school or office that does not comply with the minimum health and safety measures, such as schools or offices, will remain closed. I know of some offices in Bulobedi which are in the chief's office, so he gave them a rendezvous, all of them squashing that rendezvous. So obviously we can't operate from there any longer. So we have to find alternatives for those officials, even if it means we send mobile, but they can't operate the way they've been operating. Again, in keeping with the focus on health and safety, the directives clearly state that all offices and schools must develop a work plan. I must say, in the schools that I visited in the country, I did find COVID-19 files. Principal, I hope you have also a COVID-19 file. And we urge all schools to comply in this regard. Parents and guardians must not send their learners to a school if learners show any of the coronavirus symptoms. The screening of symptoms must be conducted at offices or schools according to the Department of Health guidelines. We have since made this available to schools, again those guidelines, and we urge all teachers and relevant officials to familiarize themselves with the health guidelines. And I think that's what you would have observed, that every school, they will set up a station before you get into the main premise to test the temperature, screen, collect information on your age and everything else. So all schools are expected, and even offices are expected on a daily basis to comply to those guidelines. So we agree that we need to work extremely hard to comply in order to prevent the infections, because that's a condition around which Cabinet allowed us to open, to say, when you say you are going back to schools, like everybody else is going back to work, rule number one, you have to prevent infections in your workplace. So which means you have to put every measure in place that there is no infection in the workplace. So there are steps that we have been taken, outlined in the directives, to help us prevent the spread of the virus. Every office and school must have easily accessible and sufficient quantities of hand sanitizers based on the number of learners, of educators, officials, or persons who access the offices or school entrances. Offices and schools must have facilities for washing of hands with soap and clean water. The cleaning of surfaces and equipment is mandatory. A mask is a must in every instance. Offices and schools are required to provide a minimum of 2 cloth masks to learners and educators, officials and support staff. We have observed that schools have been working very hard also to configure the physical environments, from staff rooms to classrooms and the play areas. This is not a matter of choice. All of us must ensure that we comply with the social distancing requirements in order to comply with the health and safety requirements. The major challenge for us as a sector has been around the management of the curriculum and teaching. Since, as of now, we have lost a whole term, because from March to June it's the second term, so we've lost a whole term. We are likely to lose more days due to the virus. And as a sector, we had to be innovative in the manner we get school programs back on track. So in order to recover the teaching and learning time lost, the schooling system has to be re-engineered, resulting in the adjustment of timetables, and that's what most SMTs were engaged with, the review of the curriculum in terms of the education policy, which empowers me as the minister to determine a national policy for a curriculum framework, core syllabuses, and education programs. We had established as DBE a curriculum work stream consisting of curriculum experts from the department and provinces, but we've also been working with academics and curriculum experts in managing this aspect of the re-engineering of the curriculum. So because the basic education directives are not static, we will always use the opportunity to make the necessary amendments as and when required. For instance, when I met the Human Rights Commission, they were concerned about clause 4.2 to say when the directive said a school not ready or not complying to the health requirements will not reopen, we will be prejudicing the rights of learners in that area when it's not their fault that things are not happening for them. And we explained that it meant the school infrastructure, not that learners will not, as the department, will be exempted from ensuring that the rights of those learners are realized. So once we agreed that there was a different interpretation of the clause, they proposed that we should speak to state law advisors, that for the mere fact that different parties have a different interpretation of that clause, it means it's not clear enough, and therefore we need to strengthen, so we'll do that. But there are also issues around that we had not considered earlier about ECD and all sorts of things. So as we proceed under level 3, we will then make the necessary adjustments as we get inputs also from stakeholders, and we'll make those public. So I must say, indeed, the national lockdown has affected our lives in so many levels. Families are traumatized, jobs are lost, and schooling had grinded to a complete halt, and the reopening under the new conditions was a real uphill as compared to other times when we have to count desks, count books, count teachers. Here we had to really create a new environment that we had not worked under before, and it has caused lots of difficulties. But as I said, we were given strict orders by cabinet that schools should not spread the virus. We should make sure that no one is infected in the school premises, and that becomes a priority to everything that we do, and that's what also partly informed the difficulties that we had to encounter over the weekend in determining whether indeed we should send kids to school today when other provinces or schools have not met the requirements, or we should use this week to mop up. At least we know where the challenges are, and we'll be focusing on those. And schools that are ready, like this school, will then do the next step of orientating learners, inducting them and counseling them and preparing them for learning and teaching next week. So Elijah, I thought I should stop there, and if you don't mind, then get the two presenters so that we can then take questions, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much, Minister, for the speech. Before we proceed to the presentation, I would like to also acknowledge the presence of the Executive Mayor of Bujanala District, the district municipality, Mr. Fetsang Molusiwa. I also like to recognize the Mayor of Rustenburg Local Municipality, Mr. Mpok No, as well as the of the Education Department in the Northwest, Ms. Stefina Simaswe. We also have the Simaswe. That cancer. Nko, Simaswe. The cancer, I always call her the HOD, so we get around such difficulties like that, Minister. We also have the administrator for the department, Mr. Joe Mohlala. Minister, I've also been joined by Mr. Tebo Khojwala from Rand Water. We anticipated that connectivity would work against us, but we'll try to connect with the CEO. If that doesn't work, Mr. Jwala is here to assist us. I'm going to now ask Mr. Godwin Khosa to come forward with the presentation. It's not going to be long, just to give us a sense of the findings from the work which they did as part of the mandate which they had been given by the department after the minister announced that a consortium had been appointed. Mr. Khosa.
Minister, Premier, MSC and the leadership of the province, DG, and the colleagues from the department that are here, and of course the members of the media. Good afternoon. It's 10 minutes before afternoon. Okay. My mental watch is ahead. But good morning. You still have 10 minutes to enjoy the morning. My name is Godwin Khosa from the National Education Collaboration Trust, and I'm presenting here a report of the consortium that comprises the Human Sciences Research Council, Ensika Consulting, Research 94 Plus, and New Leaders Foundation, who have been set up under the leadership of the National Education Collaboration Trust to undertake the monitoring and evaluation of the preparation towards the readiness of the schools. And I'm going to share with you a report that we shared with the Department of Basic Education on Saturday, this past Saturday. Mr. Mtlanga, the logistics are just a bit challenging because I must present looking there. But nevertheless, as he indicated, it's not going to be a long presentation. What I want to share with you is the approach that we have taken, the high-level observations that we have made, as well as the recommendations that we have made to the Department of Basic Education on Saturday, this past Saturday. So, if you could turn it a little bit this side, Terence. My sight is challenged, so I'm going to take this thing and walk closer. Oh. If you don't mind, I'll quickly take my laptop and we can just... Okay, my humble apologies for the hiccup. So, since we have collected the data on the readiness of the schools in the past, 12 days, I'm counting up to now, the first big observation that we have made has been the consistent observation of tremendous pressure that the education sector has been under to prepare for the return of the educators and the learners. We have also discerned the anxieties in the country and generally and specifically in the surrounding the return of the schools. Thirdly, we have observed that the department has and is continuing to collect different forms of relevant evidence from the various levels of the education system in order to help, make decisions from within the Department of Basic Education. So what happened towards the end of last year is that we constructed a snapshot of the state of affairs as at the 27th of May, 2020, and this was done with an anticipation that more work was still going to happen through the provincial departments, through to the end of Sunday, the 31st of May. Next is that we actually, due to the fast-paced nature of the preparations, there has been some, issues relating to the limited completeness of information when we finalize the data, and you'll see some of those in my presentation. And of course, this has largely been to the fast-paced nature of the readiness preparations that I've indicated, and the varying abilities of provincial departments to respond to the task of preparing schools as well as reporting, which latter task was competing with the primary purpose of preparing the schools. So the work that we have, the report that we presented on Saturday, followed an engagement with a steering committee within the Department of Basic Education on matters pertaining to the methodology for the monitoring of the readiness, and we have subsequently presented the report on Saturday to the heads of education departments as well as the Council of Education Ministers on Saturday. So the monitoring and evaluation has been crafted around very key questions, the first of which was, are schools ready to receive school management teams, teachers, and grades 7 and 12 learners as the first question. The second question had been, what is the level of readiness at the various levels of the system? So at provincial level, at district level, or circuit levels, as well as at school level. The third question, logically, was what are the blockages to readiness if there are any? And the next was what would have been the risks, the health and safety risks in the schools? And the last was just overall observations that we made about the readiness of the system. So the summary observations that we made initially to the heads of education department in the morning on Saturday were 5 in number. The first is that we recognize that readiness is not an absolute measure, but a relative measure. And the understanding from that is that readiness actually, the understanding of readiness comprises a number of expectations. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. The second overall observation was that although much work to prepare the schools had taken place in the past 3 to 4 weeks, the absence of emergency response systems and culture has made it difficult to manage the readiness preparation. The third was the PPEs, personal protective equipment, tracking and verification that we undertook, which was initiated in the 10 days that I cited, pointed to a checkered state of readiness across the country. The fourth was that most of the provinces had procured and started distributing the PPEs largely for the school management teams, and some provinces had started distributing for teachers. And most of them were actually still preparing for the rollout of the learner PPEs. And the last broad observation was based on the PPE delivery tracking and data from the sample school surveys, we then made an overarching opinion, which was it was highly unlikely that majority of the schools nationally were going to be ready to open on Monday, the 1st of June 2020. So there is lots of data that we have collected on when did each province procure its material, where the procurement processes were, where the provinces had started distributing, and where the distribution process had reached at the various levels of the system, and whether the distributed amount of PPEs were going to be sufficient, at least for the staff and the learners who are doing grade 7 and grade 12 expected in schools. So I'm not going to go through the details, but I'm going to share with you the fact that in collecting all that data, we have started actually making some of the live systems that are available with the provinces. And we made the following overall observations. The first was some provinces were still procuring certain items. The second was that actually the closer we got to the distribution and the identification of what blockages were there, the more we recognize that actually part of the challenges were from the supply side of things. There were shortages of stock, particularly cloth masks in the market. There was an undersupply of that. Some of the appointed suppliers did not have adequate stock themselves or the ability to produce those. And in fact, some of the suppliers misrepresented their abilities and capabilities to supply the PPEs. So you could have expected that that has had a knock-on effect on the pace of the delivery of the PPEs. So various delivery methods were also adopted by different provinces. Each province followed a different distribution model, some less effective than others, generally less automated, and with the number of PPEs that had to be rolled out to the schools, it was going to be difficult to manage, the magnitude of the problem with limited automated processes. This resulted in reporting being less effective. Deliveries are done at central stores in some cases, moved to the districts, for the districts and the circuits to then move to the schools. But there are a few provinces that had actually taken the route of distributing directly to the schools. From an administrative point of view, it became quite glaring that the supply chain processes could not deal, at the provincial level, could not deal with the emergency with which the PPEs had to be procured. The PPE procurement process was also disrupted by the withdrawal of the initial arrangements that provinces or government had to deliver PPEs through the Treasury Instruction 3. So by the time that was changed, provinces had to put in place completely new, systems and identify where PPEs could be, procured and delivered to the schools. There are a whole range of other logistical, issues relating to transportation and distribution, as well as, protests in some of the areas to block, the delivery of the PPEs, in schools. So that actually led to a presentation of a risk, assessment state of affairs across the provinces, which actually identified 2 provinces as the low-risk provinces, which were highly likely to be in place to have majority of their schools ready by Monday. 4 provinces were identified to be in a medium-risk, category, which meant that the likelihood of them to have most of their schools ready was much limited. And of course, there were 3 provinces that were flagged as high-risk provinces because their distributions were far behind. But I need to also indicate that some of these observations were a factor of the verifiable information that we had received from the provinces by the time we finalized, the report. So, having made that observation and given the risk assessment, state of affairs, we made the final, set of observations and recommendations to the department. The main part of which was that we took the comments by the heads of departments, which firstly indicated their acceptance of the report as a correct reflection of the state of affairs across the country. So that was important. And in fact, some of the data and the observations that we've made were confirmed directly as consistent with where things were during the presentation to the heads of departments. The heads of department, the 9 provincial departments of education, then also gave us a very lengthy account of the context in which the preparation for readiness was being carried out, with lots of challenges, including procurement, challenges, planning challenges, supply side challenges relating to availability of stocks and availability of capacity in the market to quickly, roll out the deliveries. I must indicate, though, that we have observed that the preparations that were initiated some 3 or 4 weeks back were actually starting to yield reach at a school level only by the middle of last week. And we therefore expected that will continue until the 31st of May. So, having observed that and listened to the heads of departments, and in particular the fact that the deliveries were continuing, we reached the following final observations, which we ended up presenting to the Council of Education Ministers in the afternoon. One was that progress had been made by the provincial departments from the picture that we had on the 27th of May, and the national institutions such as Rand Water, who were rolling out the deliveries of water to meet the readiness requirements. The second final observation was that an increasing number of schools are increasingly meeting the requirements for readiness. Third was that we thought there will be many schools that would not have been ready by the end of Sunday, the 31st of May, to receive learners in the schools, and that the greater proportion of which will be in the provinces that have been reported to fall under the high and medium risk categories presented, shared with you earlier. This observation, obviously we made in the context where we invited provincial departments to confirm or disconfirm the observation based on relevant, verifiable information which was provided to us by Saturday. That actually created the window for the accounting officers at provincial level to still come up with any additional information by Saturday to confirm or disconfirm the overall observations. But generally, there was agreement with the heads of departments that the report was reflective of where the country was in respect to the readiness to receive or to open schools on 1 June 2020. And on that basis, we made some secondary recommendations which related to what needed to be done should the schools be opened. So we then came to the conclusion that over and above reopening all the schools, CEM was, we recommended CEM to consider giving a partial or delayed reopening of schools depending on each provincial department confirming that schools meet the readiness requirements. Secondly, schools that do not meet the requirements we recommended should remain closed until they did so. But we specifically also recommended under that overarching recommendation that the requirements should also be clearly prioritized, because as they stand, they are complex and onerous. The requirements can be understood from critical requirements that schools have to meet to good practice requirements that the schools had to meet. So good practice requirements, for instance, would be you must have your posters and these sorts of things. But critical requirements will refer to aspects such as masks, sanitizers, washing, water, running water, and and that sort. And the heads of departments, welcomed, those recommendations and agreed to, take up some of the, management and intervention recommendations towards finalizing the readiness of schools to reopen. In summary, Minister, I would like to stop there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kosa, for the presentation. I'm now going to invite Mr. Tebogo Joala from Rand Water to take us through their presentation. I'm not sure, Terence, if we are able to connect with the CEO. Let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Tebogo to to go through it. Can we see the CEO? Okay, colleagues, let me say this in the meantime, that you can send us questions, WhatsApp questions, to our numbers, which are available on the media statements and the media invitation which we issued yesterday. But we've also shared the numbers via the different WhatsApp groups that we have. So please keep sending those questions. We have already received some questions. We will be reading them so that the Minister and the DG and perhaps the MEC can deal with them at the right time. But in the meantime, please prepare those questions. We'll be able to answer them. Are we succeeding in getting the CEO on the line? I do not think so. I think I'm going to ask Mr. Jwala to please take over. That's why you were sent here in the first place, to handle these challenges that we are facing. So we have your presentation over there. As you go through it, we'll also be flighting it on the screen. Thank you so much. Colleagues, after this presentation, we'll then be taking questions. Please get ready for that.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good morning or good afternoon, Minister, Premier, DG, I think there's Executive Mayor, colleagues from the department and the Northwest Province. Our intervention really emanated from what would have the Minister pronounced around the lack of adequate supply or lack of supply at all in some of the schools across the country. But I must say that our intervention data became apparent that it's only going to affect the 6 of the 9 provinces, as Gauteng, Northern Cape and the Western Cape had sufficiently at the provincial level dealt with the requirements of cutting or establishing water supply system within the school premises. So we'll be speaking only of the matters relating to only 6 of the 9 provinces. And the schools that, the number of schools that we affected are 3,126. And that's where our scope was going to cover. And there is 2 types of schools that we are dealing with. There is a school that has a water tank, but is a bit far from the water source. So we'll be arranging, and we are working on arranging, and to a great extent we have established water cutting system process. Water is being delivered to those schools. And we have 2,634 schools which does not have either water tank or a reticulated, decent, continuous supply of water. So we are intervening with water tanks in 2,634 schools across. Obviously, we mentioned that the provinces, Eastern Cape, the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Northwest. And in the Eastern Cape, the total number of schools that we are assisting is 756. In the Free State is 87. In KwaZulu-Natal is 1,125. In Limpopo is 475. In the Northwest is 248. and in Mpumalanga it's 435. So in the case of Mpumalanga and Northwest, for instance, a number of penetration of schools that already has tanks but no cutting of water that was taking place is 308 of that 435 in the case of Mpumalanga. In the case of Northwest, 184 schools already have tanks, and a great number of them we have started cutting water into. The rest of the other provinces did not have any such tanks already, so we have to put both the tank and the and supply water. The number of schools, as I mentioned, in the Northwest that already has tanks, it's 184, and 47 of them are already ready. That means we have already cutted water in. They can open, and there's no challenge of water anymore. And then the 137, we're still addressing them. In Mpumalanga 308, we have tanks in there, and then 17 of them are ready, and 291 we are assisting. And in KZN, we have already assisted with 60 schools, at least at 60 schools, and Limpopo 21, and then overall it's 145. So when we go to schools that does not have tanks, where we are already supplying tanks, so we've started supplying tanks over the last couple of days. In Eastern Cape, like we mentioned, we have 756 schools to assist. 11 of them we've supplied tanks and the water, and 85 of them we have tanks at the school. We're busy setting up temporary establishment because we're doing it in twofold. So we'll have immediately, just so that there is water and there is a supply of water at the school. We won't wait until we build a whole stand or a plinth that is bricks and mortar based. We'll have a temporary installation, and then the second phase will be to establish to build a plinth and some form of stands, depending on the material condition on the ground. And then, and 189 of them, we have already delivered tanks at the school premises. 289 of those schools, the tanks are at the central point at the district, and they are being delivered to the schools in the next couple of days. In the Northwest, we have 84 schools, and then 12 of them are already ready. 84 in terms of those that require new tanks, and then delivered at the school premises are those 12 which are ready, and then we have 33 at the central point that are being transported between today and tomorrow to those specific schools. And the total number of tanks already and the supplier premises which are going to go into schools, so a central point are 19. Free State, we have 87 that allocated, and then 20 of them are ready. Kids can move in, and then 30 of them are already on the school premises ground. 63 of them have been delivered at the central point and are being redirected to schools, and 67 are at the central point and within the province and are being delivered. Transport arrangement is being made. With regard to Limpopo, it's 521 total allocated for tanks. 46 of them are ready, and 134 of them are at the supplier premises and are being transported soon to various schools. And that we're recording 138 in total of tanks. So in Mpumalanga, we're talking at about 127, and 127 of them are at the central depots of various suppliers, and they have been transported. In KZN, we're talking about 1,125, and then the total number of schools that are ready, where we already supplied the tanks and we filled them with water, it's 8. And then there are some of the schools that where we have the tanks at the school premises is 65, and some of the tanks that the central point of suppliers is 31. So we are talking about an intervention of about 626. Okay, if we have to tell you about the current location of tanks, those in the Eastern Cape, for instance, we have extra tanks that are within the province but will be delivered at the school. We have 100 tanks in Free State. We have 138 tanks in Limpopo and 395 in KZN. And some of the tanks are being transported from Gauteng to various places. I mean, we've got 31 tanks that are moving from Gauteng to Free State, and 127 that are being transported from Gauteng to Mpumalanga, and 231 to KZN to top up of the deficit number that we just shared with yourselves. And I mean, I don't know whether we can see some of the presentations. Part of our presentation, we have various pictures that demonstrate and show a number of interventions. Some of them are in trucks that are in transit with tanks, and some of the tanks that have been installed at various schools that show that the water is already flowing and we are ready to start the school calendar once again. Thank you very much, Elijah, the Minister. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deboho from Randwater. We appreciate that presentation. I'm now going to ask Terence to read the first batch of questions which we have received from members of the media. Terence, over to you. Please read slowly, because we want to give the Minister and the panel an opportunity to write them down so that they can deal with them.
Certainly. The first question is for the Minister. It comes from Sidwell Kuduka of the Mail newspaper. We have seen several schools around the globe being closed just a few days after they have been reopened because of hundreds of pupils that have tested positive for COVID-19. Given the news and the fact that the virus is spreading so rapidly in South Africa at this stage, do you still believe that it is safe to open schools next week? The second question comes from Thabo Mutuping, who is from SABC. Some private schools have been asking parents to sign indemnity forms. They will not let kids back to school without completing these forms. Is the department firstly aware of this? And where schools want to absolve themselves from possible COVID-19 infections, which might happen at the school? The third question comes from Luyolo Mketana of the Business Day. How many private schools have been allowed to reopen across the country, seeing that private schools in the Northern Cape have already opened today? Luyolo's second question is, what is the Minister's response to the education sector's union's rejection of the phased reopening of schools? Luyanda's third question is, the unions have also called on all schools, even those ready to receive learners, not to reopen if PPEs have not been delivered to all schools across South Africa. What is the Minister's response to this? Are unions frustrating the department's efforts to welcome learners back on 8 June? We have a further question from Jacob Roy from the Report newspaper. Jacob Roy asks, my question is about teachers with chronic diseases. I understand they are supposed to hand a letter to the principals, but will they have to wait until the department has approved it, or can they stay home while handling this letter? We have a question here for Mr. Godwin Khoza. Can Mr. Khoza say which are the provinces that were high risk, medium risk, as well as those that are ready? Can he elaborate on the protests that blocked the deliveries of PPEs? Where were these protests? And did they establish why people would block the delivery of PPEs? And has this issue been resolved? We have a further question from Tsegofatso Moagi from ENCA. Tsekho asks, what's the plan with the Western Cape, seeing they've welcomed learners already? There have been a lot of people saying schools in Limpopo as well as the Eastern Cape aren't ready at all. Are there any plans to go to these areas or any rural area at all? Thank you. Those are all the questions.
For now. Those are all the questions for now. There's a lot of them that are coming through. But we are going to take this first round of questions, and I'm going to ask the ministers to please come through to address the questions that have been asked. Thank you, Minister.
No, thank you very much. The first question is about the closing of schools by other countries on an ongoing basis. And my answer is that those closings are informed by circumstances, I think, in those countries, which are some, I guess, not necessarily ours. I mean, last time, France closed 50 schools. And France has got more than 44,000 schools, 902. So which means in France, 44,000 schools, 848 were still operating. So which means the closing of those schools would have informed by circumstances around those 50 schools. I think yesterday they reported that South Korea closed about 100 schools, 500 schools. In Korea, there are more than 20,000 schools. So which means almost 19,000 schools still operate in Korea. So I'm saying different circumstances will inform. For instance, in our country, we are concerned about your red district zones, your Cape Town, because as teachers started reporting, there were cases of teachers who have been affected, reported. So we'll have a differentiated approach, because I think also the closing of schools in those countries are informed by circumstances in those countries in specific areas. So France didn't close the whole education sector. It kept 44,848 schools open. So which means the 50 was informed by something. Same Korea, the 500 schools would have been informed because Korea has got more than 20,000 schools. So which means the closing of those 500 schools and the keeping of other 19,000 schools was informed by also conditions. So the point is we're monitoring it. We are being guided by health, and that's why we are even discussing between Gauteng, Western Cape, KZN, and Eastern Cape in those red areas to say is there anything we can put more to make sure that we have a differentiated approach. And that will inform our reaction, but we won't have an overall answer because it's not an overall issue. That some private schools have been asking parents to sign indemnity. Private schools are completely independent. They operate within the framework of the law to say they shall teach this curriculum, they shall do the following. But in the everyday administration, DG will have to help me, we really don't have a direct say. So I'm not aware, but I'm also not surprised that I'm not aware, because they would not have necessarily have had to tell me that we are getting people to sign indemnity forms. They run their own business. So how many private schools? Again, we're saying private schools, small schools, independent schools, schools with special needs have a different management protocols, because they're independent. So what they do, we work with them through the association, recognized association representing them. And then that association, on the basis of the agreement that we have, using the tools that we are using, they then confirm to us that this school has met the requirements. Therefore, as an association of private schools, we have given them permission to operate. So they are in a different dispensation because of the way they are run and managed. So it's a different. So there's a code. So I'm sorry. There's a different plan. What is the minister's response to education sector unions' rejection of the phased opening of schools? Unless I misunderstand the question, what the report of the NECT, and I think that's where the difficulty was. The report of the NECT said, Minister and MECs, your systems are not ready even in areas which are non-negotiable, and gave us three options. Allow schools that are ready to operate, disallow schools that are not ready, or just use the week to make sure that everybody is equally readied. And our agreement, and that's the final decision we took on Saturday at CM, that let's not take chances and say this one is ready, because the report we're getting from the NECT is not saying in the 26,000 school 1, 2, 3, 4 does not open because it's not ready. So it's generic to say 80% of your schools are not ready. So we're not even sure if you say everybody must go in, if not that 20% will go in. So for safety reasons, we thought we should ask, and we agreed with unions. So the response is that we agree with them that we should not have had a phased reopening of schools, because there will be that 20% that could be the risk factor, and therefore use this period to clean up where there are areas. So the reaction that the minister agreed with unions and parents, based on our report received from the NECT and from provinces, that a phased approach might be risky. And as I said, even here it's ready, they could have started, but I'm not sure if the next school. So let's just clean our data and be very, very sure that there is that in the system we have met all the requirements. The questions about teachers with chronic diseases. Teachers where PPEs have been sent were supposed to have been at school, declared, and that's what I found, declared their a challenge, health challenge, and there are clear protocols about how to what steps need to be followed. We are supposed, say for instance, if you are diabetic, then the doctor is supposed to say this diabetes is unmanageable, therefore this teacher cannot come to work. That's the basis. So you don't stay at home without necessarily following those protocols and be granted permission on the basis of what the guidelines say. So teachers are expected to have been at school, they're supposed to have declared their condition, they're supposed to have consulted their doctors, they're supposed to have already given the principal. One school I visited, they had a teacher who's on chemo treatment, and the doctor said it's not safe for her to come back, and therefore it was granted, not just stay home, was granted permission not to come. The other one declared diabetes, went to the doctor said it's managed, she can cope, she must come back to work. So it's going to be differentiated, it's not, there's no general answer. And the unions have also called on all schools, even those ready to receive learners, not to open if PPEs have not been delivered. So there can't be a school that is ready to open when PPEs have not arrived. Because that's a precondition for reopening. If there are no masks, there are no sanitizers, that school can operate. So they're quite correct. And that's the condition we have set to say, no school, even for teachers. If teachers go to a school and find that there are no sanitizers, there are no PPEs, we are agreeing with unions. They should not operate because it's going to be risky for everybody else who's in that space. So we're in agreement with the points they're making, and that's why we had said provinces must finalize all deliveries the latest by Wednesday. They had committed that promised us that they'll finish by Sunday. We thought it was risky because we're not sure by the time we met on Saturday that indeed they will have been delivered by Sunday. So we've given them this week to say they must deliver, and there must be no school that operates when those PPEs have not been received. Thank you very much. Or visiting rural areas, yes, what I've committed to do is to go to different areas with the DM. The deputy minister was busy with Mpumalanga. I was in the Free State. I think I went to the township. But our feet, because of the challenges around movements, the NECT through its networks, through its NGOs, become our feet and eyes to visit rural areas. So we will visit them randomly, but we are counting on the NECT doing the work for us and reporting back to us independently. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. There was a question. DG, I've noted you. You will come through. I just want Mr. Kosa to address the question that was directed to him. And thereafter, I'm going to ask you to assist in responding to some of the questions that the Minister was also responding to. Mr. Kosa.
I never before have doubted Mr. Mhlanga. So that's why I wanted to work straight to the mic. But this time around we must doubt each other. Every time somebody speaks, you must wait for them to clean. So there were two questions. The one question is about which provinces were flagged at which category. So the provinces that were identified as, largely ready were Gauteng and Western Cape. And the provinces that had a medium rating of readiness were Northern Cape, Free State, Northwest, and the Eastern Cape. And the provinces that were rated with a high risk, low readiness level were Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and KwaZulu-Natal. So I must just re-emphasize the point that I made earlier on about the strictness of this kind of verification and tracking. So the level of strictness that we adhered to was akin to that is observed by auditors. So where we did not have verifiable information, we could not take any verbal reports and so on. Therefore, the rating, the scoring of these provinces also depended on the level of reporting, that is the provision of the verifiable information. The protests, where they are, why, and whether they are resolved, I don't have the details of the localities, but a couple of them were in Gauteng and in other provinces. These were associated with local suppliers or potential local suppliers of PPEs who wanted the same opportunity to provide PPEs to their own schools. And perhaps it's important to indicate that the there are several provinces that had actually gone for approaches that involve SMMEs in the provision of the masks and related PPEs, as well as in the distribution of these PPEs from warehouses. So, and that brought its own, complications, because where provinces had multiple, in fact several, suppliers, that just complicated the logistics of managing. However, there are a couple of provinces that have gone the route of utilizing SMMEs. The last point I just want to make is that it made methodological sense to spend more effort tracking the PPEs from the provincial level, from procurement to distribution down to the schools. As this material reaches the school, more attention is being made or put into gathering data from each and every school to see how the actual receipt of the learners and the teachers and the preparation at the school level are happening. On Friday, we started rolling out the school-based verification, and I can say that the team had gotten to about 30 schools, in fact 27 to be precise, and more schools will be visited in the coming couple of days and weeks in order for us to get a much more granular understanding of how the schools are dealing with the final preparations and receipt of learners in schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kosa. There are also requests for your presentation. I hope that we'll make arrangements for that presentation to be made available. Mr. Moel, can you please come through? I know you want to talk about comorbidities and other issues. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm vertically advantaged. Good afternoon, Minister, Premier, MEC, Bomajoro Barona, District and Local, Muruti Tlabanyane, and colleagues. I'm just going to add a few points. Yes, Mr. Mhlanga, maybe let me start first with the response that Mr. Kosa gave about specific areas that experienced protests. Those specific areas, as he correctly pointed out, the northern part of Gauteng, I think the Pretoria, Soshanguve area, and the explanation that he provided as the reason for the protest, people saying, we have local capabilities, why are you giving this tender to somebody from outside our area? The second area that experienced this was Eastern Cape, particularly the OR Tambo region, which experienced the lowest delivery when we received the figures on Saturday and Sunday, which had received probably the lowest. I think the last count that I saw was about 18%. And in there as well was about people who were contesting the fact that the suppliers who had now successfully responded initially, the suppliers who were contracted were the local ones, When they failed to meet the deadline, then the department resorted to suppliers that demonstrated the capacity to deliver on time. And how you determine that, you go and check the stock in the warehouse before you award a contract to a supplier. And unfortunately, at first, that was not done because, as Mr. Khoza indicated, many of the procurement processes were done hurriedly. And I don't want to burden you with the background of initially the whole of government procured through only one supplier called Imperial Logistics for the whole of government. And increasingly, Imperial Logistics could not carry successfully the burden of procuring most of these COVID essentials from overseas. And then provinces were then told after about 2 weeks or so to cancel and reorder, which then caused delays of about 3 weeks to procure afresh. So those are the two provinces that experienced this protest. I must also add that these numbers change very fast. I think Mr. Khoza did hint that to indicate that the decision was mainly based on the extensive work that they had done up to the 27th, updated on Saturday, and the numbers keep changing, and they changed drastically because provinces were delivering up to yesterday, and as we speak, the deliveries are still continuing. Comorbidities, there are two dimensions to comorbidities. The first dimension is the one that the minister explained, which requires that, in fact, all over the world, whether it's learners or employees with pre-medical conditions, they are expected to consult with a doctor, and a doctor would provide a report with supporting documents. And the advice that we've been giving in the workshops that we've been running for officials at district and even at provincial level, including the Association of School Principals and the 5 teacher unions, we took them through these workshops. We said to them, if it is not explicit in the doctor's report that a person must stay at home, then you must go to work. It is only a medical doctor who can make a determination that the pre-medical condition that you have makes you vulnerable to the environment of COVID-19 that we find ourselves in. Only a medical doctor. And we even advise the officials that no official who's not a medical doctor should question the report of a medical doctor, because you are not a medical doctor. It's only a medical doctor who can subject a report of a medical doctor to a review. Some review, ask questions, and so on. So that's the first dimension, which the minister responded to. The second dimension is the protocol, the process. What happens? We met in the Education Labor Relations Council, and thank you very much to parties in the Education Labor Relations Council, especially the chairperson and the general secretary, who were able to convene an urgent meeting. A collective agreement was concluded on Saturday on how we deal with comorbidities of educators. I've already signed that collective agreement. We discussed it at HEDCOM, and HEDCOM made its inputs. The inputs were factored into the collective agreement that I signed yesterday. So we are awaiting employee parties, in other words, unions, now to sign. It will be a protocol that determines the step-by-step process of how teachers should go about dealing with comorbidities. Thank you. I thought the minister responded to the issue of the indemnity form. Well, schools do issue indemnity forms, not only independent schools, including public schools. But we generally take a dim view to indemnity schools because people think that they absolve them from vicarious liability. And that is not the case at all. And I'm sure if you follow cases of two learners who were tragically demised in Gauteng towards the end of last year, you'll attest to the point that I'm making. Signing an indemnity form does not exonerate the school and the state from taking responsibility where there was negligence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, DG, thanks, Minister, and thanks, Mr. Kosa. I'm going back to Terence now for the second round of questions that we received via the WhatsApp lines, and we will then give the Minister the opportunity to respond to those questions. Some of them are follow-up questions, I've seen them, and some of them are questions which other media people are asking. So if the question has already been asked by someone else, we will not go through it because it will be addressed when the others are attended to. Please take us through the questions.
Thank you very much. We've still got a few more questions. The first one comes from Zintle from Newsroom Africa. My question is for Tebogo from Rand Water. How many schools in the Northwest do not have water, and how many have been provided? And does Tebogo does he think this week is enough to provide water to all the schools? So that question again from Zintle. How many schools in the Northwest do not have water, and how many have been provided? And do you think that this week is enough to provide water to all those schools? The second question is for the Minister. Unions say they will meet with you on the 11th on the issue of readiness. Does this mean there will be no school until then? We have another question here that has come from Chareshwa News. It's for the Minister. What should learners and teachers do if they only receive one mask? Can we say PPEs were issued if only one mask was received? Then we have Tami Twala from Bantu News. What is the department's plan with regard to the National School Nutrition Program? We have a second question from Tsekhoacho from ENCA. Where learners share textbooks, what plan has been made by the department? The second question is, what would happen should a teacher test positive for COVID-19? We have a further question from Sihle Mavuso, who is from the independent media. Sihle's question is, this question is for the Minister. What actions have been taken or will be taken against the suppliers that misrepresented their ability to supply the PPEs, since the action have contributed towards the delay in the reopening of schools? A further question from Nazir at Glow TV. Seeing that class sizes would be smaller, where would teachers come from for extra classes? Will feeding schemes also be introduced at the start of the reopening of schools? And would scholar patrols continue to function under level 3? And the last in his set of questions is, what is the system now doing for bookmarkings? And I think that's the final question. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask you to go first, Mr. Jwala from Rand Water. Please come through to deal with the question asked about water provision, and thereafter I'm going to ask the Minister to come through as well to deal with the rest of the questions.
Thank you once again, Elijah. In response to that question, as also, I thought I would have mentioned earlier, but clarify that the work that we mentioned that we have done, that mammoth amount of work that we have put together, it was only put together within a period of about 5 days. So we only got the money on the 26th, which was last week. So we have, within the 4 or 5 days of that period, a lot of work went into this, and we are quite confident when we respond to the question asked that by weekend all the schools will have water, and the water will be flowing, tanks will be there. In the case of Northwest, for instance, we had mentioned that 184 schools already have tanks, and 37 of them have been filled with water in the last 2 days, and today we are doing 68 schools, and tomorrow we are cutting water into 69 schools. So the rest of the schools, tanks and tankers, we will be cutting water, and tanks will be installed throughout the week. So we're quite confident we can say safely to the nation that by weekend, which is Friday, Saturday, all the schools that we have been asked to do in the region of 3,126 will have water that is flowing, and children will be safe to get into those schools come the 8th. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think the first question has been answered by Tebuho. About the meeting with unions, we normally communicate with the secretary, so they have not communicated with us, so I'm not aware of the meeting of the 11th, so I still expect or hope that they will send an invitation. We normally invite them or they invite us, so I've not received, so I have no answer. On the National School Nutrition Program, that's our plan, that we need to urgently start providing nutrition not only to learners that have returned. So for those learners that are returning, there are plans. We have trained the school nutrition team that prepares food on new and different ways of preparing under the health requirements. So we will provide nutrition to the grades that are phased in. We would have wished also even to provide nutrition for grades that we have not phased in. But I had requested the sector and the MEC to say maybe we need to wait a little, get ourselves to acclimatize to the new environment, manage that which we are still struggling to get right before we can introduce new programs. So there is intention to start the nutrition, but we just really need to find our feet in this new environment, be comfortable that we are able to manage this new environment we find ourselves in before we can get into more programs, but we have intentions to do that. Around the sharing of books, it really would be undesirable to have learners continue to share books, to share equipment, to share the necessary, to share books, equipment, because it will, even in some instances, if they have to share a book, it will undermine physical distancing, and those are some of the areas we're paying attention to. And bearing in mind that as much as we have to do things differently, there's no different money that has come into the system. So we keep on reprioritizing monies that were in the system to meet the new demands. So we're taking from Mary to help Lily, but we we ideally should not allow a situation where children or learners share books and undermine physical distancing. Or there was a question also about what happens if a teacher tests positive. We follow the health protocols. There are clear lines to say if you are screened with high temperature, you are supposed to go for testing. If you are tested, you have to go to isolation. So it's the same protocols that apply generally to the public that will apply even with us. So we're using the standard protocols. If a teacher tests positive, they can't come to school, then they have to really be a responsibility of the health sector as to how they manage them, whether they go into isolation, they go for medical treatment, but it's the same protocols that will apply to anybody. And teachers are also affected by the same. There was a question about what do you do with suppliers who are not delivering. Provinces are the ones who are procuring. So provinces are the ones which are procuring the PPs. The only program or the only thing that we're procuring as national is water in partnership with a Department of Water and Sanitation. And even there, it's a joint responsibility. There are water tankers that the provinces are procuring. We're supplementing what provinces are procuring. But in terms of relationships with suppliers, it's provinces that would have appointed the suppliers, so it's provinces that are supposed to manage the suppliers. All we do is to monitor, to say, here's a problem. We had said to bring PPs by Friday, they have not come. We have gone to your supplier's warehouse. There's nothing. In some instances, we even went to their houses to say we thought perhaps your supplier has kept supplies in the garage. We've even gone to their houses. They don't have the equipment. So again, those entrepreneurs are managed by provinces. I hope I've answered all the questions. On class sizes, we are anticipating a major challenge and we are taking one step at a time. And that's why in every school, we really want to estimate to say, you had 5 grade 12s, now we have to turn them into 8, which means you are using your grade 11 teachers to do that. So if we phase in grade 11, it means the grade 10 teachers are going to come in. So what we're looking at as provinces is to look at our relief teachers, because we have a list of experienced teachers who really come and assist us when there's a need in the system. If there's a teacher who's not well, they come and assist. But we're also looking at our database of teachers who have applied. So we have a good size of young people who have qualified as teachers that we have not been able to place as long as 3 years. So there's a huge list of young, highly qualified teachers that we have not been able to appoint. They are in our database, both at provincial and national. So there again, we are quite confident. So the issue is going to be the resources to say, if we take them in, we have to discuss with Treasury to say, how do we pay them? But there are also plans or discussions about, because other activities have been reduced to platoon, because most of the schools I visited, DG, were saying to me, after grade 10, we will not be able to take anything else with the splitting of classes. So which means the principal is agreeing, which means in terms of space and teachers, when we start phasing in grade 8 and 9, there's going to be a major problem. So we might even have to go to Treasury to say, there is no way we can continue, because, which is what I always say, as education, we're not only an education institution. We also are a support system for parents. They leave their children with us to educate them, to look after them and take care of them. So as the economy begins to open up, we're going to be under immense pressure to also create spaces. That's why people are phoning to, my child is in grade 9, so what happens to me? My child is 4 years, is in grade 4. What happens to me when I'm at work? So there's a great pressure, or there's major pressure on the system to open up as quickly as possible, to take as many learners as possible, and that we are working on plans. And I do hope that when we get to that level, your grade 8 and grade 9s, we will be able to get help from Treasury. But we are aware of the imminent crisis that we are going to confront.
Indeed, colleagues, as the Minister indicated, if anything happens within the precinct of a school, whether it's a teacher or a learner or a non-teaching staff who present symptoms that eventually are confirmed to have tested positive, there are what we call standard operation procedures that we issued for all schools. So the standard operation procedures have been issued by the sector, and they stipulate clearly, step by step, what schools are expected to do. And as the Minister said, the logical step would be the Department of Health will then begin to kick in. Minister, I just wanted to draw the attention of the public and the media to the directions that the Minister referred to in the speech that she presented this morning. Section 10 of the directives, subsection 2 and subsection 3. Subsection 2 says, with respect to class sizes, Minister, it says, in order to ensure compliance with health, safety, and social/physical distancing requirements, school facilities must operate at 50% or less of their capacity at a given time. So, principal is aware of that. 50% or less, so that you meet the health, safety and social distancing 1.5 meters in between, like here. So if you don't do that, you won't be able to meet that. Subsection 3 then provides a solution to this, because some schools have got an overall learner enrollment of 1,005, some 2,000, some more than 2,000 learners. It says, subject to the subdirection 4, schools may consider and apply any of the following available timetable models suitable for their context and functionality. And some of them the Minister referred to. It says A is daily and weekly rotation. In other words, daily and weekly rotation timetable. The second one is bi-weekly rotation. The daily weekly rotation, maybe let me explain. If you've got, for instance, 1,002 or 1,400 learners, then you have to divide them into two groups. Group 1 would attend Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Group 2 would attend Tuesday and Thursday. The subsequent week, the first group would then attend on Tuesday and Thursday, and group 2 would attend on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that's a daily and weekly rotation. B says bi-weekly rotation. Bi-weekly rotation, it means group 1 attends this week, group 2 attends next week. So whilst one group is at home, the other group will be attending to observe social distancing. And then the platooning one, the minister covered it. It's well known by all of us. That's model number 3. Model number 4 is what we call a traditional model. In other words, it's a timetable that this school followed before lockdown. Normal, 6:45 up to 2 o'clock, you go home. We refer to it as traditional model. And then the last one, which is number 5, is the hybrid of the ones that we refer to. Thank you very much, Minister.
I forgot to respond to the question about the number of masks. The instruction to provinces was that they must buy 2 masks for teachers and 2 for learners. And if they receive one, I think through the NCT or through the office, we need to be notified, because as much as provinces say there's a scarcity of cloth masks, DTI had given us a list of factories in the country who, because of the lockdown, were unable to do their usual work, will be able to assist government with masks using the correct material. So we are ready to intervene and activate those factories, and that's what made Gauteng and Western Cape to move ahead. Western Cape went strictly to factories in the Western Cape to get them to produce masks to save jobs. Gauteng did the same, get factories that are your factories to make masks to save jobs. But there was a progressive decision to say, also give locals an opportunity to be able to participate in the procurement and give cooperatives. So if those cooperatives are not coping, we should not compromise the fact that we have given directives that is 2 masks per learner and 2 masks per educators. And we then finally agree that educators must get screens, especially educators teaching children who are hard of hearing, because they lip read and they also have to read, to really have facial expressions to explain to them what is being discussed. So it's a standard, so there shouldn't be shortcut. It's 2.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, DG. Thank you, HOD Simaswe. Mr. Joala from Randwater. Mr. Mark Monroe from Anglo-American. Mr. Mpo Kuno from the Rustenburg Local Municipality. Also from the district municipality. Premier Mokoro. And all other partners that are here that I might have omitted, Mr. Kosa, and the officials. Thank you so much for supporting us and this media briefing. This was the second school that we're visiting today in the Northwest Province. We are still proceeding to the 3rd school. It is called Manape Secondary School. That's where we are proceeding to now. With those words, we've come to the end of this media briefing. We will continue to engage with you using the platforms that we have. We have seen that there are a lot more questions that are still coming through, but we will not be able to deal with all the questions in one day. It's a work in progress. We hope that you'll continue to work with us as we try to get the education program back on track again. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
All right, that was the Department of Basic Education there, briefing the nation on what is going to happen in the education sector. They were there in Rustenburg at the Sunrise View Secondary School, basically confirming, the Minister, Angie Motshekga, confirming that indeed schools will resume for learning on the 8th of June. Educators are expected back at school today, assuming that they do view that the school is COVID-19 ready, that is all the PPE equipment and everything that needs to be there to be COVID-19 compliant is available. Well, for more reaction to the Minister's briefing, I'm joined via Skype by Mugwena